welcome to another episode of the Tell Not Show. As always, we have your host. We have the fabulous Kirsha Fox, um, author of The Son of Deception and The White Leaf Child. She's a homeschooling mom of four, avid reader, and gamer.
And this is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach. She's a fantasy and horror author who loves to put magic in everything. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you. And we're very excited to welcome our guest today. Go ahead and tell us all about them.
Yes, Randi-Lee Bowslaugh was born and raised in Ontario, Canada, and from a young age, she had a passion for helping others. She's an author and outspoken advocate for mental health, sharing her true story with honesty. We're so excited to have her.
Yes, welcome to the show. Oh my
Hello.
gosh. Yes. Tell us a little bit about your writing journey. What got you started as an author, and what does it look like for you?
So I've pretty much been writing my whole life. I started when I was super little. I used to write a household newspaper and make my mom read it. I'm sure she was impressed. But as I became a teenager, I started using writing as a coping strategy for when I was depressed. And those poems actually became my first book that I published in 2017.
Tell us a little bit about the genres you write and why you love them.
So the one I write most about and the one I started with is nonfiction. I love that one because I like being loud. What I mean by that, what I mean by that is that I don't want to hide anymore who I am. And what I learned a long time ago is when you feel by yourself, that's when it feels the worst. So by sharing my story through the nonfiction writing, I'm able to then hopefully help other people not feel alone. And then I've also written some kids' books because nonfiction's pretty darn heavy, especially since it's a lot about mental health. So I gotta mix in some fun.
Right.
And then I have written a collection of short, scary stories because I love all things horror. And I'm plotting out a new one, which will be kind of more suspense thriller, I'm thinking.
Oh, very nice. I also have dabbled in the horror genre. It was something that I thought I could never do and then had so much fun. Because it's like examining like what makes you afraid of things. Like it's so interesting to explore and then try and piece into stories. So I love that genre as well. Yeah, yes, I absolutely love that you are such an advocate for mental health and all of those issues. I think it's so important. It's one of those things that it's still like a stigma to even talk about. And like you were saying, people feel so alone because of that when they're dealing with those issues. So we love anyone who is getting their story out there just so that people know that this is not uncommon. 1 in 5, at least in America, 1 in 5 adults has a mental health condition. So it's really something that should not be as isolating as it still feels.
Yeah, I think Canada's stats are pretty much the same.
Yeah. I think so too. But I really, really love that you deal with those hard issues, which, like you said, they can get kind of heavy writing about sometimes. Yeah, so that's so fun that you lighten things up with the children's stories and some other fun projects. So what got you into the suspense thriller, though? I'm wondering, that pivot.
So, well, because I love all things horror and suspense thrillers kind of in that genre, right? It was actually my kid that came up with the initial idea. He's like, oh, you should write a story about this. I don't want to give anything away yet because I'm still working on it. But,
right.
You should write. And I go, maybe I could. And from his initial idea, I mean, I've changed it a little bit, but I think it's going in a good direction.
Yeah, no, I love that. My sister loves to give me story ideas too, and now I tell her, you write that story, because she's gotten into writing herself. So I love that. Yeah, I love to just put it back on her. Like, why don't you write that story instead?
Right? It's like I could help edit or something at the end, but like it's your story, do it.
Right. I love to see where she goes with things too.
So can you tell us a little bit about your writing process? How do you go from like idea to finished manuscript?
So it really depends on what type I'm writing, but I would say majority of the time I have kind of a theme or a purpose that I want to get across, and then I just start writing based on that purpose. And then as I go, then other ideas come, and sometimes I'll jot down those ideas like, I think that this should come before this topic to make the flow make sense. But I usually just have a general theme and kind of go, and the rest falls into place.
Yes, love that. Would you say that you are more of a plotter, pantser, or hybrid?
I would say, well, probably hybrid, but definitely very pantser. Because like I
Pants
said,
forward, right? Yeah.
right. Let's just go. We'll see where it takes us. Sometimes I have to go back and rewrite because I've kind of taken a left turn. But
yes, writing yourself into a little corner.
yeah. Although with this thriller suspense that I'm dabbling in now, there's a lot more plotting happening. I'm not used to it, so it's taking me a while.
Yeah, those little. That's the thing with like when you get into more of like the mystery and the crimes and stuff. You have to like plant clues a little more, foreshadowing, a little those mysteries to unravel. Yeah,
exactly.
It is kind of funny though when you get started on something and a friend asks you, "Oh, like who was the killer?" You're like, "I don't know. I'll figure it out."
Right. When you're still in the middle of the story and figuring
they
out
haven't revealed themselves.
Yes.
Yes. No, I love that too. When that
it's fun when your characters surprise you. You're like, "Oh, you had a sister? I didn't know that. That's useful."
Right. What do you think is the most important part of writing?
Again, I am going to throw it back to the fact that I do mostly nonfiction. And so the most important part would be knowing the purpose of the book.
Yes.
Without a purpose, there's no point in reading a nonfiction, let alone writing it. So I would say keeping your purpose intact.
No, I think that purpose is one of the things is really helpful for all forms of writing, even like in school when you're writing essays and stuff, knowing why you're writing and what your aim is to convey is so helpful in those early stages of writing, especially. But yes, I can see how when you're writing nonfiction, especially when you get into more of like the memoirs and graded essays and all the different essays, like you can write a pretty essay that says nothing, as I learned in college in my creative nonfiction classes. Yes, I wrote plenty of things that I'm like, oh, it sounds great, but like, what are we really saying here? So,
yeah, exactly.
Purpose is important. I love that. Would you say that this is probably a better question for your fiction writing that you do? Characters or plot? Which one matters more?
Ooh, that is a tricky one. I would say characters. Like as a reader, characters matter more to me. As a writer, though, I kind of feel like the plot needs to come together before I form my characters.
Okay, you kind of have to learn what's going on before you dig deep into who they are. Okay, I love that. Yeah.
Oftentimes it's as we unravel the plot that the characters reveal themselves as well. Like
exactly. Yeah. But when I'm reading the book, I want good character development, or I just find it kind of bleh.
Yeah.
Right. If we don't care about the characters, we don't care what happens to them for 200
exactly.
pages. Yes. This is very true. No, I'm definitely one of those readers that, yes, I have to care about the character. I remember reading American Psycho, just to throw out an example of like unlikable people. And I finished the book, but it was just like the horror. They go and spend like thousands of dollars on dinner that they don't even eat. And then, of course, the actual horror in the book. But just, oh my gosh, there was so much that I didn't like about that character that reading that book was very difficult. Just because I was like, he's such a slime ball. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So characters do help.
I've also read some things where like at the end I was like, well, of course things ended terribly for you. You're a terrible person and I'm not going to feel bad for you. Like you had this coming.
Right. Yeah.
Right. The worst is when you like the character and they die.
Oh, right. Oh my God, that's such a heartbreak. But it happens so often with favorite characters. Kind of like the second you fall in love with a character, you're like, oh no, what's going to happen to you now?
Right? You're making me like them too much. You're going to do something to them.
Right. I think we're all a little guilty of that as
authors. They start saying something really sweet and you're like, oh no, you're gone. Like, don't say that. Like
Right? Yeah.
Soliloquy, like that meaningful sentiment right before the end. Yes.
Yes.
It should be so fun to play with that though as an author.
Oh
Oh
gosh.
yeah.
Yeah. How much of a surprise do you want it to be? How traumatic do you want it to be?
Right.
How badly do you want to scar your readers with it?
Oh,
Right?
no.
Exactly. It's when you have to know your audience to know how much you could scar them.
Yes.
You want to them to have that emotional reaction, but you also don't want them to throw your book across the room and never pick it up again.
Right, exactly.
It's all about balance in writing. I always say that. Yeah.
So who would you say is your favorite author, and what's something that they do well?
So I really struggled with that question at first, but honestly, my favorite author is probably Sherilyn McQueen, formerly Sherilyn Kenyon. And because she creates this world, and all of her books, well, all the ones that I read from her, all take place in this world, and I love the interconnectedness of it and all of the kind of unique characters. It's a lot of fun.
Does she leave little Easter eggs, clues for like the connections in between the different characters of the world, or?
Yeah, and it's not just the world, but it's like through time, like because it's different pantheons and stuff. It's the demons. It's cool.
Oh, I love that. Yes. No. I know Stephen King does that a lot too, and I always found that so fun about the fact that like everyone in his world is from his world, and you can find those little clues hidden throughout his books. What have you learned from the writing process?
That it's hard.
It is hard.
That is facts. Yeah.
Right. I've learned a lot about myself too, because as I'm writing, especially the nonfiction ones, as I'm writing those, I'm kind of like having little light bulb moments for myself, especially because I like to put in research. But for other things like the kids' books, I've learned that less is more.
Right. I have attended some different conferences, and I know like the one thing about kids' books is they're a lot harder to write than you think, especially getting that rhyme scheme correct. Like if you're not going to do the rhyme scheme correctly, like don't do a rhyme scheme at all, because if you like have one that like falters and falls off and then comes back, it just is a mess.
Yeah, because I started with poetry, I love rhyming stuff. So I do enjoy doing that for some of my kids' books. Not all of them, but quite a few.
No, that's awesome. I had a lot of bad poetry that I wrote in high school, and I did poetry as my senior thesis for college as well. But yes, rhyming is not. It's a skill. It's definitely a skill that you can learn, but like it's not as easy as it seems. I know. Yeah. I know.
I usually start. Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say I wrote a lot of bad songs even in middle school where it was just like rhyming you with blue, and you know what I mean. Like I was trying my darndest, but
it's baby stages. You have to come from somewhere. You have to.
Right. Humble origin stories. Yeah.
Yeah. I find I start with like one really good word, and then I try to build everything off of it. But when I get a really good word that I can't find something else that I want to rhyme with it really bugs me.
Oh, I know. Right.
Like this is the word I want.
Right. But that's a great way of tackling it. Is like, what's a great word and a rhyme scheme to come from that? Yeah. I love that approach.
Yeah. I totally agree with you on writing is hard. I feel like in movies, when they show authors, it shows them like, sitting down for 8 hours and typing at their computers or, staring.
Right.
And then it shows them like the end, and they stuff it all in an envelope and they put it in the mail and it's done. And I was just like, that's misrepresented. That's not how it is.
Right.
Yeah. Where's the scenes of pulling out your hair and then getting an idea when you're in the bathroom and then forgetting it immediately when you leave?
Yes. If you don't write it down, like thank God for phones, because if you don't write it down immediately, it's gone forever.
Oh yeah.
The better the idea, the faster you forget it. Yeah.
How many times in the shower I've gotten out, reached my phone, written down a few sentences, and then went back to the shower because like you can't use that thought. It will be gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh my God. The shower is where it always hits too. when you're just like shampoos in my eyes, and I have to try and remember this for the next 5 minutes. If you could tell a new author one bit of advice to help them out, what would that be?
Write for yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great when people want to read your book, but I feel like if you write for yourself, there are going to be other people that want to read it too. And it's way more genuine.
Yes. Yes. No, I tutor writing, and it deals mostly with writing for high school and stuff, my students. But I always tell them, like, if you're not passionate about it, you can write 5 pages, but we will know that you don't care about this topic at all.
Yeah.
Like, it's really important that you pick things that you actually care about to write about, even if you don't think it's interesting. Because, like you said, you'll have your audience out there, some of you who will fall in love with it because they're similar to you. And if you love it, they'll love it. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, my favorite reviews are the ones that are like, this book is so emotional, I needed tissues. And I'm like, okay, good, because I needed tissues while I wrote it.
Right, but what a great compliment to then get, like, oh, this book made me cry, but that's such a good compliment to get. Yeah.
So how do you make time for writing?
Oh, I don't.
We're all pretty busy adults.
Right.
Honestly, it's harder now. I've started working more hours as things have gone up and up. So it really is a matter of whenever I really feel like a good idea is brewing, I'm like, hey, everybody leave me alone. I'm writing now.
Right.
Just stop bugging me. And I put on like my headphones or come up here. And it actually I was writing a speech. I'm doing a speech for the Women's Leadership Conference that's coming up. And I could not focus at home, even though people were leaving me alone. So actually I went to Starbucks and I like banged out the whole rest of it in so fast. I was like, okay, so this is what I need to do.
No, sometimes getting in a different environment is so helpful. Yeah. Like they always say, like, don't work in your bed because then you'll never sleep in there again.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's true. You make these associations between like what to do in what space. So sometimes, going to a cafe is the best. I had a local cafe I went to, and I wrote my first 2 books there, and I just loved getting out of the house and sitting down and knowing I was writing with like protected time, like no one's there to bug you when you're not home. So that was so nice.
Yeah, I turned my phone on do not disturb, like I am not even looking at it.
You have to protect your time and like yell at people if you want them to like seriously leave you alone for those hours. Yeah. I know it's not always the nicest thing, but like that's what whenever someone's like, how do I do nano, and it's just like you yell at people when they interrupt you, like so that they learn to not interrupt you for your writing time. Like I will be writing from noon
priorities for sure.
Yeah. So I did want to pivot a little bit and ask you what do you find are some of the biggest differences between writing the nonfiction and then writing the fiction part? Like, what does that look like for you that's so different?
So when I write my fiction, it is so out there. So like my scary stories, none of it is based in any kind of a reality as we know it. So it's a huge pivot, and I get to let the creative juices flow. My scariest stories, it's always a monster type of thing that is the bad guy. I don't like to do just the straight up murderer, which I mean, I like to read those, but I just find because I'm writing so much about regular life, I want something totally different. So I just 360 that. Or I guess 180, 360, I'm coming all the way around. It's just 180 that.
Right. Yes, doing the flip side. What struggles do you feel like are different when you're approaching the fiction versus the nonfiction?
Character development, right? In the nonfiction, I'm telling my story. So I know me inside and out, generally.
Right.
And I'm not trying to develop a character arc, per se. I have one specific purpose in those books that I'm trying to get across, whereas with the nonfictions, I need to develop a character that I have never met in real life. Somebody that I get to name. I get to decide how old they are. So
right.
Character development is super different.
Yeah, and how do you approach the character development in general? Like, do you find like free writing or just getting into the story is the best
Just
way you learn the character?
getting into it. Yeah, just
Mm.
I again having that one concept. So my kid actually drew this picture that I turned into one of my stories. So he drew this picture of a circus, and I was like, "Huh, that's kind of neat."
Yeah.
So I'm like, "Okay, so I have the circus characters, but then who is it gonna be that is
Mm.
dying or being
Mhm.
kidnapped or whatever?" And so it just flowed so naturally to have it be high school students that
Oh,
end
yeah.
up with it. So it it all came from that one picture. So there's so
Mhm.
many different things that can inspire you.
This is so true. I know that a lot of people really like some you I feel like people are either like they have more ideas than they will ever use or they struggle to get ideas.
Yeah.
But it's a way of framing your mind to see everything as a possible what if to
Yeah.
make those stories happen. And I feel like it's a trick that like once you like kind of figure out that hack of like changing your mindset to being open to anything's a possibility, then you'll switch over and be like, oh, now I have too many ideas.
Yeah, I'm definitely a too many ideas person. I have like a whole
Yeah.
board of just different ideas and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I am never going to get through all these."
Right. What a good problem to have. Where do you think you find those inspirations from the most?
Uh, Mostly, I'm gonna say when I'm walking my dogs, ideas just kind of
Oh,
pop
okay.
into my head. It could be so another one of the scary stories came because I was walking the dogs and this
Mm.
tree looked like it had a face in it. I was like, "Oh,
Right.
okay."
Right. Oh
And
my
so
gosh. Yeah.
yeah, just from seeing that tree, an entire story got created around it,
Yeah.
and I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh, that's perfect." So literally anything, but nature is I love nature. It's so helpful.
Mm. Mhm.
So a lot of stories just kind of pop into my head being out there.
Yeah, people watching can help with that too. I
Mhm.
feel like if you just see somebody
Right.
and be like, "What is their story?" You can get a good story off of that as well.
Exactly.
Well, there's something about like moving too, I
Yes.
think, that lets your body be busy, but your brain like can go
Yeah.
to its place. You don't have to think
Yeah.
about walking. You don't really have an agenda. You're not really going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's just free to float and think about whatever it wants to think about.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Especially
I
when I'm
think
walking the dogs because
mhm.
it's something I do every day, so it's just kinda like a monotonous kind of task, which I like doing
Mhm.
because I love my doggos, but it's something I don't like you said, you don't have to think about at all. I don't have to think about the route I'm
Right.
taking. I know
Right.
exactly where everything is, so I just can go and be like, "Oh, look at the bird and look at the squirrel."
Yeah, and see what captures your attention. I think that's so important. And a lot of people forget too, your brain is also an organ that like getting that blood flowing by walking or moving around is gonna
Yes.
feed your brain to get those ideas
Yes.
too. Yeah.
Oh, look at the
They are
bird. Look at the squirrel. Look at the tree that has a face.
Yeah,
yeah. Look at where that
exactly.
story comes in now. Yes. All right. Do you have a favorite part of writing?
Um, I love just being able to get the ideas out.
Mm.
Yeah, I would say the first part of just getting everything out there and having it come to life.
Yeah, there's a lot of catharsis that happens in writing too, I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially like when you are writing your nonfiction and working through these mental health struggles, like that can be so freeing to get it out
Mhm.
of your head. It's on the
Mhm.
page. You don't have to obsessively spiral over it all the time. Yeah. Writing is
How'd you know
so
I do that?
therapeutic. Oh my God. I am one of
Oh,
the
goodness.
five. We'll just say that. Yes, one of the five. Elite. But yes, I think my favorite part of writing is having written, right? Just that
Yeah.
sense of like you accomplished something and you were productive and you got, some of the story figured out. That's such a great feeling to have.
Yeah.
Do you have a least favorite part of writing?
Editing. Short answer, editing.
Common
I
answer, yes.
Oh, it's so frustrating because like you have to be pretty meticulous at it too,
Yeah,
right? Like cuz you want the story to be good. You want it to
right.
make sense. You want people to read it and actually absorb the story, not be like, oh, there's a mistake and there's a mistake. Wait, you said on that page. So I understand
Right.
why we edit, but oh, it is just the worst. And like, I've written my story, so I want to move on to the next story. I don't want to have to reread this story and rewrite certain parts to make them make more sense. I just want to be done.
Yes, I am an editor, but I hate editing my own stuff because I hate reading my story 30 times. Like, by the time you're done, you're just like, oh, I'm so fed up with this story.
Yeah.
Like, yes, like if I have to see this page one more time, I will like throw something across the room.
Right? And you're like, wait, did I change that? Is that the way it was before? Wait, I'm so lost.
Right,
Because you've just read it so many times.
Yes. You're like, is this boring, or have I just read it to the point where like it feels too familiar?
Yeah.
Yes.
No.
It is drudgery, but like sometimes you come upon something and you're like, oh wow, this is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Like almost at the end, and you're like, this is looking good, you know?
Yes, it is well worth it, but it is very tedious, as you were saying.
Yes.
People will ask sometimes, like, how do I know when it's time to edit? And then my answers are always like, if you feel like you can't do anything else with it, or if you can't stand to look at it, pass it on to someone else and give yourself that break, right? Like,
right? Yeah.
Yes, pass it on to an editor or beta readers, give yourself a little break, see what other people think, and then, you know, you'll have that little bit of refresh between looking at it again.
Yes, exactly. That was something they taught us in school a million years ago, was like, put it down, wait a little bit, then go back and read it because you're going to have fresh eyes.
Yeah, you almost want to forget it before you look at it again, because otherwise you're seeing like what you know is supposed to be there as opposed to like what's actually on the page. Because people have these great visions in their head, but it's not always translated into the writing initially, especially. So it's just like, yes, forget what you were writing and then look at it again.
Yeah. Or in the case of reading nonfiction, you come upon something, you're like, oh, I didn't say anything about this, and that really should go there. You know?
Right.
Yeah, that's what happened in my last book when my editor sent it back. She's like, okay, so I know that you know your story, but we don't as the readers. And I don't know how you went from here to here. Like, you're missing this middle piece. I'm like, oh, yeah, I guess I am.
No, that makes so much sense. I had at my university, I worked in the writing center, and I had a math major come in with their thesis or dissertation or something, and they had all these formulas, and I'm like, why are the formulas just listed? And she's like, oh, well, if this is true, then this is true. And I'm like, if then is very important words to have in between this list of formulas.
Yeah.
I'm like, I know you're math heavy. We don't need that many words, but we do need a few words.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, we need it to make sense where we're going through, cycling through these different formulas.
Yeah, you need to kind of almost think like the reader at that point. Right? Like, yes, write for yourself. I've already said that, but you do need to consider that the reader doesn't have all of the knowledge that you have.
Right. We need to put in what's pertinent in the background. Absolutely. I think that's especially important for nonfiction writing, because there is that base level of knowledge that you need your reader to have to understand the material.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for? Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, you have to make it simple enough that someone who's new to the whole topic can be introduced and educated. But you have to make it relevant enough that a whole bunch of people will be able to enjoy it as well.
Get something from it. Yeah. Glean information. Do you have any tips for knowing that balance, or?
Honestly, getting somebody else to read it is probably the easiest way to figure it out. Because again, as the person who's writing it, and especially for nonfiction, having lived it, it's so easy to just be like, so I went to school and then I got an F. Wait, on what? What test did you do? What class were you in? Right. Because you're like, well, it's obvious. School F, you figure it out, but it's not obvious. So you have to really put yourself in the reader's perspective of not having that knowledge So getting somebody else to read it over is so helpful. Somebody who doesn't know the story, right? So if you're
Right.
giving, like, I had my aunt read over my last book, and she was like, okay, yeah, there's a few things I'd say here and there, but she already knows the same information I know because it was about my brother's death. So she already
Okay.
knew that. So when I got, and I was like, okay, good. I just, I wanted to make sure that I got all the, I wanted to make sure that it sounded nice at the same time with the heavy topic.
Right.
So when I sent it to somebody who did not have that information, they were like, okay, here's a few little spots you got to fill out.
To fill in. Yes, yes. Makes sense. So that's great advice too. It's just like having that second set of eyes of somebody who's not familiar with the topic and what do they need to know to understand.
And it works with fiction too, because again, as the author, you know what is happening, usually, sort of. The characters can lead you on a wild goose chase, but you have a general idea of what's going on, where somebody else might go, wait, I thought that the characters were on that side of the map, but now they're magically on this side of the map. Wait, what?
Oh, right. Yeah, those things, those tricky things will pop up and you're just like, oh, that's an inconsistency.
Exactly. So having that second set of eyes, that's where you're going to find those inconsistencies.
Yes, a new pair of eyes is invaluable. What would you say influences your writing?
Life.
Okay.
Short and sweet. I mean, with it being a lot of nonfiction, obviously life would be the biggest thing. But just, again, coming back to something I said at the beginning, making sure that others don't feel alone. I spent so much time hiding who I was, trying to be somebody else, and just feeling awful the whole time, that it inspires me to really be loud and make sure that my voice is heard so that other people don't lose their voice.
I love that answer. That's a great answer. I think, like I said, it's so important because there is such a stigma and it really just needs to be normalized. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like you said, 1 in 5 have it. And then there's another stat that's like every person has been affected by it, right? 1 in 5 might have it, but everybody to some extent has been affected, whether it was a friend, a family, right? Somebody.
Yeah, and it's important too because even if you don't have like mental health conditions, you still deal with depression, you still deal with anxiety, you still deal with bullying. The average person is going to have moments of their life where they're going through a tough time, and the benefits of talking about mental health and struggles and all that stuff is when you are going through those hard times, you have access to resources and information and things to help you through it.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it really, to have your diagnosis of, say, anxiety, it, sometimes it can come down to a lack of coping strategies that somebody might be missing, whereas somebody else going through a very similar situation might not be dealing with the same amount of anxiety because they have different coping strategies that they've learned.
Right.
But we don't know that because people don't talk about it.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. I think it benefits everyone to talk about it. For sure.
All right. Do you ever deal with writer's block?
All the time.
Okay.
I think, can you call yourself a writer if you haven't, really? It doesn't, I mean, because I don't force myself to write. I know I've talked to other writers and they're like, yep, I sit down and I write for an hour a day and that's what I do. I tried that. And that just made my writer's block so much worse. So I was like, I'm not doing that anymore. I think because I've chosen to write when I'm inspired to do so, it's not as bad as it used to be when I was trying to force it. Writer's block, you got to feel the creative juices or it's not going to work.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think that burnout is such a huge thing that people don't always take into account when they're trying to force their way through things like writer's block. Because it's like, if it's writer's block just because you're like maybe forcing the story in a direction it might not go, then yes, forcing yourself to write something, maybe you'll get unblocked. But if it's something more akin to burnout or you're not refilling your creative well that inspires you, then forcing it is just going to prolong the problem.
Exactly.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
I think it's a careful balance to be sure that you're still getting yourself in those places where you're going to be inspired. Take your walks, go to
Yeah.
your cafe, sit down, stare at the computer for a little while, or take a notebook and doodle and try to I think it is important to take breaks. Absolutely. Like we
Mhm.
shouldn't be forcing it. But I think that there's something to the ritual of something about that regularity because I feel
Right.
like a lot of authors, they'll hit that block and they'll stop writing and then they get out of the habit of writing and then
Yeah.
they never pick it up again.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
I feel like, and I've said this so many times in regards to mental health treatment, but do what works for you,
yes.
Yes.
right? Having a habit is amazing. If you can have it, then yeah, it really, especially when you get out of the house or out of the place and you're in your special writing spot, I think there is something to be said about
Mhm.
the environment and
Right.
having that be an inspiration for you, because now I'm in my cozy spot of this is where I write, and the juices, who knows,
Mhm.
maybe they'll start flowing
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I
Go watch
love
a
that.
movie, read a book, have a good time, fill that cup with
Right.
energy. Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
There's other things that you can do as an author that don't require you to always be writing, right?
Right.
Reading is always a helpful thing. People watching, filling your cup up, right? Like those are
Mhm.
all things that are so important to you as an author that
Right.
if you're not doing those things, just writing constantly, yeah, you're going to hit burnout.
Absolutely. And it's just as important to be doing other creative things just to get that creativity going. I always love to say, like, meet myself where I am, not where I wish I was.
Yes,
And that's
exactly.
like a great principle to apply to this issue as well, of like, if writing every day is going to work against you, don't do it. But if it's going to help you, like, do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where it's just like, some people would feel too much pressure or be too neurodivergent or any number of things. So it's like, yes, meet yourself where you are and figure out what hacks work for you and then
Yeah.
apply that to yourself. I love hacking myself in different ways and being like, okay, this is how Julia needs to do it.
I remember the first time somebody was like, it's a life hack. And the first thing that popped into my head was, because I love horror, was like hacking something
Hacksaw,
up,
yeah.
right? And I'm like, what? What? Right now?
Oh my gosh, yeah, that sounds horrific when we're thinking of it from that angle. But yes, I hack myself all the time in
Yeah.
non-horror ways.
It's the only way I get by is learning specifically what works
Right.
for me and how do I trick
Oh my
myself
gosh.
into doing what I need to do because I cannot rely on motivation. That's not
Right.
consistent.
Right? No, well, that's why like the speech when I was talking about earlier, I was like, okay, I'm going to Starbucks. I'm going to sit down. I'm just going to do it. There's a
Right.
deadline. It has to get done. And so
Right.
there's an external motivator that I have to do.
Yeah.
Whereas a lot of times
Mhm.
an internal motivator, I don't have one of those.
Right. Right. Because you can always do it later. Right.
Right? Exactly. The
It
dishes
gets in
need
that
done or
someday
whatever.
category. Yeah, that someday category of like, I will absolutely do this, but I'm not applying a time of when I will do this, so it never
Yeah,
gets
exactly.
done.
I think that sometimes there's this little rebellious voice in our head that's like, you can't make me. I do
Right.
what I want, like
Right. Yes. Yes.
yeah. But when you make it a treat, something you
Yeah.
get to go do, like
Yeah,
it makes you excited to go do it.
exactly.
I Yeah, and I think most of learning to meet yourself where you are is unlearning what we've been taught our whole lives of how to do things, right? Because even if you look at the science of things, like positive reinforcement works the best, but it's always been people trying to impose consequences of not doing things. And then that
Yep.
doesn't work as well for like the majority of the people, but we still try and use that as like a way of like getting ourselves to
Right?
have the motivation and the drive to do things.
Yeah. I was
Yeah.
telling my oldest, so she had a baby, and I was like, yeah, kids are like dogs, right? And so
Mhm.
that just reminded me of the other day. We're sitting on the couch. My husband's eating his pizza. He has it in his hand. Our puppy.
Oh, no.
I say puppy, but he's 2 now.
Right, right.
90-pound shepherd. He's not small, but he takes it out of my husband's hand. And so my husband
Oh,
was
yeah.
like, "Go to your crate. You're in trouble," right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Nope. you can't do that because his crate is a happy place. And
Right.
he is just doing what he's been taught. He's been taught that dad gives him food when he's sitting there, that dad will let you lick up the crumbs, because he doesn't do that to me. I'd be sitting right there beside him, and they do not do that to me because I taught them that they can't. Right. So there's definitely this whole relearning, and punishments don't work. Teaching positive with the positive reinforcements, that's what gets them going. And I just always remember telling the kids, kids are like puppies. They're, positive. Be positive.
And that intermittent reinforcement still reinforces. Like, even if you don't reinforce it every time, if you give in once every third time, they'll still know that it works. Yes. Oh my gosh. Oh goodness.
So what would you say is your most significant writing victory so far?
Ooh, no one has ever asked me that yet. Oh, that's a tricky one. Now, I would say, and I did mention it earlier, there was this one review in particular where the person, and I didn't know this person, which always makes the reviews a little bit sweeter because I'm always wondering, well, you're my friend. Is that your whole honest truth? But I didn't know this person at all. They posted the review on Amazon, and it talked about how emotional the book made them and how they could relate to a lot of it, and they cried while they were reading it. That's probably my absolute biggest victory, because my hope for that book was to elicit those kinds of emotions. And so reading it from somebody who I've never met before, who doesn't know me at all, to read their review, I felt so accomplished. And I'm like, and even if it's only that one person that ever feels that way, I'm accomplished.
You've done the thing. Yes. I love that. Yeah, no, what a great review to get. What are you reading right now?
What am I reading right now? I am reading, I can't remember what it's called. It is by Betsy. I'll look it up. It's right here on my phone.
Yeah.
So I read probably about one book a week. And I do book reviews. So sometimes I forget which one I'm reading at that time.
Right. So, fast turnover, yes.
Right. I'm reading The Illusion of the Perfect Profession. So it's this woman, it's based on her actual life, her lived experience. Her husband, who was a doctor, died by suicide. And so she writes this memoir to really reinforce that. I mean, we've said it, the stigma is around and people don't talk about mental health as much as they should. But we also forget, I think, that doctors, there's this really high rate of suicide among doctors, which I didn't realize. Like, I figured, okay, they must suffer from mental health just like everybody else. But I didn't realize that there's actually like a high rate of suicide amongst them because they go through such stress with the profession, and especially when they lose patients.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. It can hit them very hard. And I mean, and thinking about it, I'm like, oh yeah, that would be awful. So I'm about halfway through that book. So it's kind of interesting. She uses a lot of her old diaries in the book to express it, which I was like, that's really cool. I always wanted to keep diaries because now that I write nonfiction, I could have went back and put them in, but I didn't.
Right. Ideas are always best in hindsight. Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I think dentists are like the number one suicide rate because everyone hates the dentist and they just get a lot of stress all day. So that makes a lot of sense that when you're a doctor and like people are really relying on you, that you can feel extra pressure and stress.
Exactly. You see a lot of horrible things, like alarming things, all the time. It's a very stressful job.
Yeah. And thinking about it, I mean, I couldn't even imagine being a doctor through the COVID pandemic because you couldn't even go home and get a hug. Like so many of them weren't living at home and they were losing patients constantly. So that would have been 10 times the stress level.
Times. Yeah. No, for sure. I think I think we saw a lot of like good doctors retiring, good nurses retiring because that was just so much to go through.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I don't blame that at all. I don't think I could have.
Right.
Granted, I don't like to look at blood, so I'm out
Right.
anyways.
Not your profession. Yeah. No, I just, yes. I can't even imagine. Yeah, to just be able to, like, it's so cool about like talking about poop.
Right?
Yeah, just everything you have to be chill about. I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
That my doctors are like that, but I could never.
It's a special kind of a person, I think.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
No, my
And good
sister,
for them.
yeah, my sister was very smart. She knew she wanted to be a doctor, but she only wanted to do eyes. So she's like, I'm going to be an optometrist because she's
Yeah.
like, if people don't want to listen to my health advice, I don't want to be annoyed. I'm just going to do eyes. And she loves eyes too. She finds them fascinating. So
Oh, that's
she
cool.
went. Yeah, I think optometrist is a pretty safe for medical.
Right?
medical
Yeah.
field. You don't have to deal with too much icky stuff, right? So.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that'd be all right.
Yeah, yeah. Do you have any writing advice that you hate that either just like does not gel or you think is poorly given?
So, like, advice that I've been given that I'm just like, psh, that's no good.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I would say, well, that whole write every day thing,
Yeah.
no, that does not work for me. Other things, some people have said to me, write for your reader. I'm like, no, write for yourself, and the readers will come. That one was probably the worst one because it is in complete conflict to what I believe and what I say.
Right, right. Yeah, no, I would agree. A lot of times, I mean, even Stephen King has said, like, write with the door shut, meaning write without thinking of the reader too much, because then you can get that, like, anxiety and pressure of, like, is this good enough for anyone to read? Yeah.
Right. I remember when I published my first book, and it was more of just like, I'm publishing a book and that's what I'm doing and I'm going to be done. And then I just kept going because it's so much fun to do. But afterwards, it was always the thought of, well, what was it any good? And then it became this whole, I've written a book. I never, for the longest time, I didn't call myself an author. I said, I wrote a book. But because I was worried that people were going to read that book and be like, oh, it's awful, it's horrible, right? And then it took me a little while to get the confidence to then publish a second book and continue and be like, you know what? No, right, I am an author. But it can be really hard to embrace that part when, sometimes we just say, I'm going to do it because it's something I always wanted to do. And then it's, I wrote a book, but no, I'm an author.
Yes.
No.
I'm with you on that. Definitely, I want people to read my book, and I can't think of anything more terrifying than someone reading my book.
Yeah.
Right? It's such a double-edged sword.
It really is. Yeah.
I have a very hard time with marketing because it was like, hey, I'd love if you read this, but like,
don't tell me if you did.
Right? Only tell me if you loved it.
Good stuff. Yeah. Unless you only have good stuff to say.
Yeah. Yes.
I only want to hear the good things. And like, I know that I'm not going to, my books aren't going to be liked by everyone. Like, that's impossible. There's books that I've read that I'm like, it's not really for me. Like, because people send me their books to do the reviews. But at the same time, even when I write the review for the purposes of what I'm doing, I'm like, okay, so if this book is, I just reviewed a sci-fi. So if this is a sci-fi book, if I was a major sci-fi fan, would I have loved it? Yeah, I think I would have. I'm not a major sci-fi fan.
Right.
Sci-fi is kind of okay for me. I'll read it. I'll watch it. So I kind of put myself in the mindset of, if I was your target audience, is this a good book? Is there anything to complain about? No, it's well written. It's good. The characters. And I kind of do it that way. And I wish that more people, when they read a book, because after I write my reviews on Amazon, I like to scroll and see what other people said about the book.
Yeah.
And one person said, oh, this was not a good book. I mean, sci-fi is not that great anyways. Then why would you have read it? Like, it very clearly says that it's sci-fi.
Right. Why review it at that point? Because you're clearly not the audience. Yeah.
Right. So just like, as a reader, just think before you post stuff because we have feelings. Authors have feelings.
Yes. Just this week, I was talking to an author friend of mine, and she'd gotten a negative review from someone who said, like, I don't like how most of the action happened on ships. And she's like, this is pirate romance.
Right.
Where else would it have done that?
Yeah.
I was like, why did you read this? Why did you leave a review?
At the same time, I mean, I can read those reviews and be like, hey, well, you just clearly didn't accept what the book's premise was. So right. So your review's kind of nothing. But it really sucks because it can bring your overall rating down.
Right.
Because they didn't look at what the book was about before they went and read it. And now they're just gonna talk about how it's bad, even though you knew that coming in, or you should have known that coming in.
Right. I always say, like, look up your favorite author and read their 1-star reviews, and you'll see very quickly you're in good company, because like even someone who you think is an amazing writer can have like these horrible reviews, and it's kind of freeing in that way to be like, well, if someone's going to criticize my favorite author, of course they're going to criticize me, because who am I?
Right.
I feel like so many authors struggle with imposter syndrome, and they struggle with, I feel like, you know, we grow up and go to school and learn that like literature is like, we're writing the next great American novel.
Right.
Or, literature is so important, and it's so, everything's meant to be like your magnum opus. And it's just like, no, like some books are just meant to be escape or entertainment or whatever. And but we still put that pressure on ourselves that we have to be writing like the next American novel or the next Canadian novel, or, and it's just like, no, like just write and somebody will love it and you'll feel happy.
Write for yourself. That's why that's how I say, write for yourself.
No,
there's going to be other people that have similar tastes as you.
Right.
Now, as you were saying before, though, it's the marketing side that sucks.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Because how do you
author business?
Right? How do you find that audience that is similar to you and your likes for your book? Oh, that's the worst.
That is not an easy task by any means.
There's that's one reason why we do the show, is giving authors a little bit more light, a little bit more exposure, helping them connect a little better. So,
which we appreciate.
Yeah. So we do want to say thank you for joining us, taking the time out of your schedule to join us on our show tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been fun.
Yeah, no, it's
you ladies are lovely.
Oh, thank you.
High praise coming from a fellow podcaster. We appreciate it. Yes.
It can be hard to podcast with somebody that it is hard to podcast with somebody you don't know, and maybe you only have a handful of information about them, and you want to have an intriguing and fun kind of interview. It takes a special person to pull that off.
Yeah.
Go into these pretty blind. It's a grab bag of who we're going to meet that night. But they're usually pretty awesome. I think there's only been a handful of interviews ever that were like,
usually the only problem is just like curt answers where they like don't elaborate and they don't, open up and continue talking. That's
exactly.
So we've never had a bad guest. We've just had some more that are like more curt when concise with their words, and I'm like, this is the time to talk.
Right, exactly. Well, even when I was like, what was the question? What's your least favorite thing? Editing. I could have left it there, but then I'm like, well, where do you go from there with your conversation? You got to put some more into it.
Yeah. So we've met some absolutely wonderful people though, and had some amazing conversations. So we feel very
podcasting
fortunate.
Is great.
Yes. So thank you again for joining us. And we do want to give you an opportunity to let us know where we can learn more about you and your books online. So feel free to share your socials and your website.
Yeah, so my website is rbwriting.ca. And all of my books are on Amazon. If you just search in my name, Randi-Lee Bowslaugh, everything will come up on Amazon. As well, I'm on Facebook at RB Writing. I am on Instagram and TikTok at Randi-Lee Bowslaugh. And my YouTube channel is the Write or Die Show.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
I wish I could take credit, but my friend came up with the name.
Oh, it's a good name though. We love that.
Right? Yeah. I loved it. I had to go with it. And my book reviews, you can either read them on my blog on rbwriting.ca, or if you prefer to listen to them, you can listen to them on Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And it's called What I'm Reading.
Very nice. Shania, it's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. And thank you to everyone who's listening along at home. Remember, there's more than one way up a mountain. And our next episode will be airing on Friday as usual. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find us on socials at The Tell Not Show, or email us at thetellnotshow@gmail.com. Thanks again.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach, and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to 4, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks, and see you next time.